Good evening, everyone. Give us a second here to set up and we'll get going. So where that's going, as Ben had mentioned, we're at the end of schematic design. And what that means is a lot of the major design elements of the project have been established, and we've really kind of started to define the scope of the project. I'm not saying that that won't evolve and change as we move forward, but this is a good point. It's kind of like a mid-design point to come to the board, present the design where it's at today. I'm not going to go into a lot of in-depth detail on the floor plans. We've done that already. What we're going to try to do is highlight some of the floor plan revisions from the last time that we presented. We'll also show you the exterior design. And then, as Ben had mentioned, we want to spend some time on that mechanical system. You know, the MEP scope of this project is a little over half the cost for this project. So it's a major component. And given the fact that the mechanicals are a majority of that, we felt it was really important to kind of address that with the board tonight and kind of walk through that. So the first thing I want to pull up is actually the site plan. There we go. There we go. So I'm just going to kind of orient you here. One of the things that's a little different, this is the site plan in general. And what you're seeing here in this gray area, that is your existing footprint of your building. These darker brown areas, this is the building addition to the north being up in this plan. That has to do with a lot of the housing of the administrative departments. There's the courts addition just off of Main Street over here. And then there's the law enforcement center addition. At the previous presentation, we had also showed you the elevator addition for the judges. Since our last meeting, that has been eliminated. We found another way to get secured parking to work, and we'll go through that in a few minutes with you. A couple other elements on the site plan that have been changed. We've modified this whole existing entrance drive. That's your existing curb cut along South Center Street. And we've modified this in a way and eliminated some of the parking and created a larger radius here. And that's to allow semis to still get into your site at that location. Right now, semis or large trucks do deliver food service for the law enforcement center. So, and it's a really difficult entrance pattern for them right now. So that was to ease that a little bit in that location. The other component on the site plan that was not addressed last time is the site across the street. And that's this parking area over here. Right now, the MIS building sits in this area here, and your existing county parking lot sits here. What we've done with this is we've really just tried to look at extending that parking lot up and around so that the circulation pattern just continues up and around. We're able to get a 4% grade on that existing site, so that should work well. As far as stormwater drainage off of that, we can use a lot of the existing systems so that we're not tying in and creating all new stormwater management plan for that parking lot. Keeping in mind that there is no stormwater along South Center Street, but there is an inlet here, and there's actually an inlet over here on the site. And so that we will be, whoops, I'm sorry, wrong portion. Inlet here, and there's also an existing inlet at this location so that we will be able to use that drainage swale and get the stormwater controlled off that parking lot without introducing a whole nother underground stormwater system. At this point, we met with our civil engineers this morning, and we believe we're disturbing less than an acre, and that's very important as far as stormwater management is concerned. Once we get over an acre of disturbance, we do have to get the DNR involved and deal with a whole nother set of rules for stormwater management. At this point, we believe we're below that, so we should be able to take into consideration the existing stormwater and use that accordingly. And again, of course, we'll have to deal with the city and coordinate a lot of that with the city as we start our city meetings. A couple other areas on the site plan that have been talked about. Right now, and this is just a placeholder here, it's this rectangle here, that's an outbuilding to hold any maintenance equipment for the site, snow blowers, anything like that, because we are right now in the floor plan taking that space that's currently on your existing building and turning that over to actual office type space. So that is an outbuilding there, and there's still some discussion as to what that building scope that should be. Is it just for the maintenance equipment? Do we create a larger building in that location to help with food service for the law enforcement center? So there's a lot of discussion still being held on that piece. So right now, in schematic design, that is just a placeholder at this time. All right, so let's go to the floor plans here. First floor plan. Yep. There you go. So again, I'm not going to go through all the spaces on the floor plan. We've addressed a lot of those, and we've met quite a bit with staff and everybody. Everybody's on board and kind of approved this direction for schematic design as far as staff and the Building and Grounds Committee. But just to orient you again on the floor plan, this area out here is the existing parking lot with South Center Street to the top. North is to the left. The building plan, one of the things we did, as you recall, is we kind of moved departments around to hopefully improve efficiency and security for both staff and the public. So in doing so, what we've established is on the north wing over here, if you recall, that's all the county administrative type departments in that location. The main entry for the courthouse component still stays at this location. The departments have been reorganized so that the courts pretty much take up all the middle portion of the site. And then to the south side, you have the jail and sheriff's department in the law enforcement center at this location here. A few of the, hang on, I want to scale this. A few of the areas in this area, and again, I'm not going to go through all the specifics, but the land use groups, there's a lot of discussions back and forth. That's new for them to all be combined into one department, or one space, I should say. Just to let you know, we have worked out those areas. We've got a very good flow that they seem to think works well for them. It also accommodates for the future growth, future contraction, that ability for one department to grow, one to contract. It seems to all be making sense for them, and they have signed off on that. One of the other major moves that we did on the first floor since the last time you saw this was we've relocated this hearing room. Right now, the two hearing rooms butt up to each other at this location. The previous presentation showed one hearing room in this location with register and probate between them. It was decided due to a lot of staffing and operations requirements, it would be better to slide those two hearing rooms together. And there are some structural challenges with that, but we've got those worked out. And so what that allows is flexibility for the clerk of courts department to handle both functions for their own clerk of courts counter, which is located here, as well as the register and probate counter, which would be located here. That way staff here can multitask and handle both counters, and you still got the separation between those counters due to confidentiality issues. So that was a major move for them, and everyone seems to be comfortable with that layout, so that was the direction we're moving forward with on the schematic design. I had mentioned before about the elevator addition being eliminated. That was at this location here. What's been discussed now for secured parking, which currently sits out on site here, and we are taking away that driveway access to that, the judges still had a lot of concern about their security, getting in and out of vehicles and in and out of the building. So it was decided and worked out with the sheriff's department to allow the judge's staff to come in to that to the secured parking garage, and we found a route through the building to get them up to the secured elevator. So by doing that, we felt it was acceptable to eliminate that addition on the west side of the building. The only other minor point here I'll point out is this addition here for the law enforcement center has grown just slightly, maybe about 1,500 square feet or so, and that's just due to some programmatic needs, but we are still holding dispatch, emergency operations in that addition, so that's all being maintained. I'm going to just go to the ground floor, the lower level. I'm going to jump over here. If you recall, on the ground floor, we are relocating the MIS department from across the street. They are now going to be situated at this point here in that courts addition, the lower level of the courts addition. One of the things that's kind of evolved since we started the planning was, and I don't want to go into it in total detail, but the whole idea of the central plant for mechanical systems. So we had to reorganize this space a little bit and allow the central boiler plant to be located in this area right here. So we've shifted some of their spaces, their computer storage and computer recycling spaces to this location here. We will vet that out with the MIS department. We have to still share that with them and have a meeting with them to discuss that. But that's just one of the minor changes on the ground floor that we've come across. over here, this is the route I want to talk about for the lower level. This is that parking garage where the judge and DA, they need 7 spaces within this area here. So we've identified the 7, and then we found a route through the building to get to this secured elevator at that location. So again, we can eliminate that addition by getting them into their space without going through the public corridors through the use of the existing elevator. I think that was a really good move for the county to move forward with and try to save some funds there. On the second floor, there really weren't any modifications to that. The second floor still is held as we had shown before, and that's with, again, the administrative suite being here. The county clerk's department, it was decided we actually flipped the whole space. We mirrored it. Their waiting area used to be down here. We mirrored it, flipped it up here, and the reason for that was the communication back and forth between these 2 waiting areas. Again, trying to improve efficiencies between the staff and departments and how that operation would work. Seems to work out well. We kept the county board chair's office up here right off the county boardroom. So that all seems to be working. From a planning standpoint, the rest of this area here, as far as the courts, is all pretty much remained as is. There was a little bit of shuffling of some offices, one department growing a little bit more, the other department being able to contract. So that's all been worked out. And again, as I've said, we've kind of got the sign off on the floor plans at this point for schematic design. So the next thing we thought we'd bring up today, and Lindsay's actually going to present it, is actually the exteriors. We've started to look at the exteriors a little bit. I want to just kind of walk through that with you guys with our 3D model. There you go.
So right here, this is that northeast addition that we're looking at. And what we've really tried to do is tie it into the existing 1965 building here. So you'll see that we're carrying these vertical brick piers, again, kind of repeating that similar language, breaking that up with some vertical glass elements. As we wrap around to this east elevation, we're being a little bit more playful with that spacing, kind of giving a little bit more of a modern take on that 1965 building. Still integrating the cast stone, so trying to match that off the existing building. And then opening up this corner here with a little bit more glass. The reasoning behind that is that on the first floor, that's the location of the break room, so allowing more natural daylight in, as well as some views out onto this existing monument. As we move around, this is that courts addition. So this west elevation of the existing building, it's a little bit more solid. It's primarily the cast stone. So we really tried to break that up by adding this more glass volume that wraps up and around this lower brick volume here. Again, we're trying to tie in with the brick on this element as we do on the north elevation here. And again, integrating more of that glass. So views out, more natural daylight into the spaces. Looking at ways to break up that glass with some vertical elements here. And then looking at more of a light well space to get daylight down into the MIS department on the lower level, as well as a skylight on this south elevation here to do the same. Moving to the Law Enforcement Center addition. Here we're really trying to tie into that existing cast stone. You'll notice we're showing a little bit more glass here. That's that emergency operations entrance, so showing a canopy there. Again, showing a little bit more glass that wraps up and around this volume, trying to tie it together into the courts addition, and then breaking that up with some vertical elements as well. And then we've brought in some of these punched openings, kind of playing off the existing courthouse building with the depth of those windows and more of the angled sills. So being a little bit more playful with some of those punched openings. And then you will notice on this volume here, we are showing a roof screen. And that is to screen some of the mechanical equipment that'll be located on that addition here. The thought behind that is that it'll have easy access into the existing law enforcement center mechanical room, which is located right in this volume.
Just so everybody knows, that space there, again, as we've tried to centralize mechanical systems, create one mechanical system for both buildings. So right now it's kind of segregated into two buildings. And the goal here was to optimize efficiencies and hopefully dollar savings down the line, life cycle costs. We've created a new central boiler plant in the lower level, as well as a single central cooling plant up on that upper level. And that's what you're seeing there in that location. And Steve's going to talk about that here. I think that's a good segue into that. Steve's going to talk a little bit more about the mechanical systems and how that's kind of evolved over the past couple months.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start out talking about the existing mechanical systems within the building, and then I'll lead into what the proposed new mechanical systems will be. So currently, down at the ground level, if we look at the way the building is split, it is essentially in two buildings. So we have the courthouse side, which is on the left side. So we have serving that a boiler. We have two boilers and several pumps that serve heating hot water, and that's located in where the orange rectangle is down at the ground level. And then we have constant volume air handling units that are located in this cyan box and another constant volume air handler that's in this cyan box. Now, the challenge with those units are constant volume, which is a big energy user. So the intent is for us to be looking at that and come up with ways to improve that. And then on the law enforcement side, we have a constant volume air handling unit that is located down at this area. And then we move up to first floor. And then we have another, this is an interesting unit here. This is actually a dual duct air handling unit, again, a constant volume. So it's a completely different system than what's elsewhere in the building with using return air. This is a dual duct air system here. And then over on the law enforcement side, let me, if I can zoom in. Sorry about this. There we go. And then I'll try to get the panning figured out. Sorry about that. There we go. So here's the existing air handling unit that serves the law enforcement center. And we have one cooling tower that's currently outside and it's behind a screen wall. And then we have one 285-ton chiller, water-cooled chiller. And then we have two massive boilers that serve this. And I would like to point out that there is no redundancy on the chilled water. And there's also no redundancy on any of the air handling unit fans. So if there was a loss of either a cooling tower or a chiller, you would lose all cooling capabilities on the law enforcement center side today. And then even on the boiler side, there's no redundancy on the courthouse side either. So you would lose one boiler and you would lose capacity in your system. You'd still have some heat, but you wouldn't be able to maintain space temperature. Now, if we go to, if I can get back to my normal screen here, I'll go to the next level up. Sorry, wrong way. Then we get to the roof of the courthouse. And the way that we get refrigerant, actually, on the courthouse side is we have air-cooled condensing units on the roof. And one air-cooled condensing unit is associated with a dedicated air handling unit. So if you lose an air-cooled condensing unit, you lose all cooling to that associated air handling unit. So portions of the courthouse would go down for cooling. So now looking at the proposed new solutions for the layouts, the first thing that we looked at, like what Ron brought up, was trying to centralize the boilers and the chillers. And doing that, you're taking all the equipment, you're building in redundancy, and you're saving on overall boiler size and the number of pumps. And then looking at the chiller side, we're going to build in capacity, extra capacity as well. So first thing we're looking at is doing a centralized boiler plant down at the ground level, and that's located in this area here. So we would have 4 boilers, 1 fully redundant boiler. So if we lose a boiler, we have redundancy built in. We have 3 pumps, 1 fully redundant one, and then the rest are the specialties required to operate the boiler plant as well. And then the location that the existing boilers that serve the courthouse, that location changes slightly where it frees up that mechanical space. We still have domestic hot water located in there, but what people may not understand right now is the courthouse side is not sprinklered, so there's no fire protection. So we would be utilizing the 8-inch water line that comes into this corner for the mechanic room, and we will put all new fire protection in on the courthouse side. And then the air handling units we're going to utilize the same locations, but what's different is we're going to have variable volume air handling units. So we'll have return air, outdoor air, and relief air. Today, the relief air for the air handling units gets relieved into the corridors, which is an issue for building pressurization. So we're going to solve that problem so you don't have doors hanging open. And then going to the first level, this is where we get a little more creative and trying to utilize the existing mechanical space, which is a big volume space. And what we'll do here is we'll have 2 new water-cooled chillers that serve the entire building. So that's law enforcement center and courthouse side. And these are 2 500-ton chillers, fully redundant. So we lose 1 chiller, we still have cooling for the whole building. And then we have our pumps, the same thing, fully redundant. And what's important to understand here is that we're going from the existing tonnage for the law enforcement side is 285 tons. That's what the chiller today is. So we're just adding 215 tons of cooling to do the entire building. And I just wanted to point that out because being able to do that, now we get rid of either trying to do another full filler and cooling tower on the courthouse side or going back to air-cooled condensing units. So now we have a more efficient system, not only from just energy usage, but also for maintenance and controls. And then to the location that we're putting the cooling towers. Find it on the screen here. There we go. So now we're looking at the cooling towers being on the roof of the new addition. Right here. So we have cooling towers on the new addition. And what's important about that is we have the ability to size the structural steel to accommodate the weight for the towers. And then the air handling unit that will serve the majority of the law enforcement center would be an exterior unit mounted on the roof behind that screen wall that Lindsay showed earlier. And then we also have another air handling unit that currently serves the kitchen area and the jail side that we'll be replacing as well. That's the mechanical summary.
So I think with that, that was a really important discussion over the last couple of months in regard to getting the mechanical system up to a point where we're hoping to actually be a much more efficient system. As you know, a lot of the systems you have in the building now are the original. They're 50, 60 years old and well past their life expectancy. So, you know, it's a good move, and I think this is a real good direction to go with that. The last component we wanted to share with you guys was the preliminary cost estimate to this point where we're at. And Anthony's going to present that tonight. And Lindsay, you're going to help me find where that's at. Got it. This one right here. There we go.
Is the other Word document on there too?
It is, if you want me to.
Might open it up right away as a swamp.
Okay. That was the discussion points. Whichever one you want.
I'm going to start with the other one. So, hey, thank you, Ron. As Ron said, I'm Anthony Moss with Moss Brothers. With me is Mark Stafford, also with Moss Brothers. Last time I was here was 6 months ago. In that time frame, the project, as was just discussed, had some scope changes as well as some economic impacts from the economy as a whole, as I'm sure some of you are aware. So to start here, I organized into two columns. The column here on the left is as it sits today. The previous column is the data I took from 6 months ago. I highlighted the numbers that changed from 6 months ago for clarity. And as you can see, construction costs between the building additions and renovations and also the MIS building demolition and parking lot construction have both gone up. And I'll get into more details later. Some of that is scope changes. A significant part of that is simply inflation, which from what I've seen, has been running between upper single digits and lower double digits over the last year. So the last 6 months, typically it runs about 3.5% to 4% a year. So that's been pretty significant. Design fees have also gone up a little bit. That just represents Potter Lawson's updated contract. And then the numbers in this next grouping are what we call soft costs or owner costs. A lot of them remain the same. A lot of them, frankly, are just placeholders at this time as we work out some details with the county and county staff on how we're going to address some of these issues. One of the items we added here was we increased winter construction costs. We didn't carry any last time, assuming we were going to get started on this early enough in 22 to have the additions enclosed before winter struck. So that's maybe looking like that might not be met depending on how we phase the bidding process here. So we wanted to at least allot some dollars for that. Another large increase there is the security and cameras and access. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail on the next page. And then we broke down the subsection here into some potential levy-funded items, which essentially, Ben, would be items that could potentially be moved outside of this project and looked at as separate projects. I hope I'm describing that correctly. So as you can see, overall, as the project sits, we're about $2.2 million higher than we were 6 months ago. And again, I'll talk a little bit more on the next sheet about how much of that is some scope changes versus what we've seen for inflation. But obviously, it's a reasonably significant amount, especially in 6 months. What this number is, $36.32 million, is a snapshot of where we sit today. Honestly, previously in this 34.125, which was the total number last time, I did have about 3 or 4% in there for inflation. That's typically what it runs in a year. Inflation in the last 6 months has eaten through that and then some. So right now, I don't carry any inflation, which could happen between now and when we're targeting bidding this project in May of next year. And so what I wanted to do is show you some, I'll call them inflation scenarios based on different potential inflation in the next 6 months. Again, typically 6 month period, you'd figure in maybe 1.5% or 2%. In this economy, in this marketplace, and the unknowns we see, I've given you 3 scenarios of 3%, 6%, and 9% between now and May of 2022. If that happens, that becomes reality. who knows? I'm sure there'll be books written about what we're seeing here in the economy right now. We're certainly not alone. I've talked to some of my industry peers, and everyone is basically seeing this happen. The reasoning for that, obviously, the supply side is well documented. I think probably everyone here is running across something that they have wanted to get in the last year, but have seen delays. In construction, a lot of that is, we're seeing a lot of that, especially steel related products, HVAC units, everything down to lockers. You're seeing delays and some snarling of the supply lines, if you will. The other thing I would call is demand. In the last 6 to 9 months, the government, frankly, has created several $1 trillion in new money. A lot of that's flowed to private business. A lot of it's flowed to government entities, and those entities, both public and private, from what we've seen, are looking to spend that money in the near future. So there are some forces there that are working out there in the economy that are creating some of this inflation. There were a couple additional projects that may be outside the scope of this project that we wanted to add to the bottom of the sheet also. One of them is the new storage building in the parking across the street. Ron mentioned right now that scope is relatively undefined. $250,000 is a lot of money, but if that project grows in scope and becomes more of a center for food service on the LEC side, and that scope changes and grows, or additional vehicle storage, that number could go up significantly. So we'll track that and see what happens with that, but we want to at least note that that is something that's on the radar. And then the east parking lot street storm sewer work is a project I believe that the county and city have been talking jointly about in the last couple of years, 2 years, year and a half. And that work, the entirety of that work would be $375,000 from what we see on paper right now.
If you recall, that was actually a budgeted project that we just postponed in 2020. Part of the fiscal first day, wait and see what happened with the COVID. The other part was kind of seeing where this project went.
So as you can see, as I mentioned, $2.2 million is the bottom line increase that we've seen in the last 6 months based on some scope changes and inflation. I will talk a little bit more about this here. The first couple of budget bullet points I think I've touched on already. Supply chain, demand has really driven inflation. Some of the significant scope budget changes, and these actually total out to be about $700,000. The first one's actually a deduct, and that takes that into account, is that elevator addition for the judges that was removed from the previous budget. Was a $300,000 line item that was taken off the previous budget. The rest of these are increases. The additions, as they've been refined more, has added about 1,000 square feet of space, approximately $150,000. Division 28, which is the security cameras and access I mentioned on that first spreadsheet, is about a $400,000 add. A big chunk of that, about 160,000 of that, is that we've added 40 additional doors on the interior that would have card access, and instead of just the exterior doors, and that's for control, security of people moving within the building at the request of the county. The remainder of that is the previous number was an engineer's estimate. This time around, when we did this budget process, it's almost like a practice estimate. We sent it out to a lot of subcontractors in the area, experts in their fields, to take a look at this and give us their opinion on what the cost of their scope would be. So a couple of electrician numbers came back higher than what we previously had on. So we thought it'd be prudent to increase that budget to reflect what's a more likely, realistic price tag for that. Some of the HVAC changes that were just discussed, ballpark, this is hard to tie down real accurately, but our gut feel there is about a $250,000 add as far as some of these things being moved around. Previously, we weren't replacing the duct work in the LEC. We were making the assumption that that was going to be able to be reused. One of the boilers, when we were going to keep the system separate, was assumed to be able to be reused. Now all the boilers are new. Maybe there's a potential for that boiler to be sold. Obviously, we'll look into those things. Obviously, that kind of thing's in demand right now. And then the chillers and cooling towers moving also to a central system. So there is some construction cost impact there. I think, and I don't have specific numbers, but the thought is there that over long-term payback, those are really wise decisions as far as energy usage, inefficiencies with the staff, and maintenance. So probably money well spent. Another one was the alternate hearing room Ron mentioned, where there was he mentioned some structural challenges to work around. Essentially, it's removing a load-bearing wall and coming in with a very large, a relatively large beam and set of columns there to bear that load. And then some window louvers and canopy at LEC are just some, frankly, more aesthetic items on the exterior that were added in the last 6 months. $100,000 there. And then there was a operable, movable partition added at a jury assembly room, which is about $30,000. So again, those total, I believe, $700,000, which is about a third of that $2.2 million increase we've seen in the last 6 months. The remainder of that 1.5 is attributed to inflation. Again, that's about 4.5% of that increase, that total increase. But keep in mind that we also had about 3.5% of inflation built into that last number. So really, in the last 6 months, there's probably about 8% inflation built into this. And based off what people we've talked to and what we've seen, that sounds like an accurate number. Yes.
Just go to the bottom line quick, Anthony, with the inflation. So obviously the biggest thing is where we're at from a projected budget standpoint, and how we build this. And we had built some dollars in with that, basically that 34 million, kind of aiming towards that with a little flex going up to that $36 million in the initial bond authorizing resolution. So obviously we're at that 36 million if you look at where we're at today. So as part of that ARPA proposed budget, if you may recall, we have reserved money that we believe is eligible for the American Rescue Plan Act of up to $7 million. Now, the original goal and direction was to hopefully take that 7 million away from that 36 million, so the actual debt issue was less than that originally planned. So that gives you a little flex as we look at it. That could be, depending where that inflation goes, an opportunity to have those dollars available. So just when we look at it in total, you got that 36 and 7. So again, that's not the goal to take this project to 43 million overnight either, right? The goal is to keep it as close to that 36 million or less as we can. But from a pure budget planning standpoint, where we're at, there are some options available without having to go back or reduce the scope of the project either. So I just will make sure everyone understands that. Anything else?
No, I think at this point.
Okay. So at this point, we want to quick give an update, take some time to quick answer any questions or comments even from the Buildings and Grounds Committee that might be out there, and then give everyone a quick break before we start the regular meeting.
Let's hear from Supervisor Payne first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to thank our consultants. They have worked countless hours on this project over the last year or two, and we started this prior to the pandemic, and I want everyone to keep in mind that the reason why we had started it was primarily because we had to replace all of our mechanical systems. As was mentioned, they really have gone past their expected life and lifespan, and at this time we thought that those systems would need to be replaced. And then while we're doing that, it would be great to update the building for Wi-Fi, safety, all the issues that have been discussed. And so we still feel as a committee that despite the increases and the unknowns in inflation, that we felt that we want to proceed with this project with these unknowns. We still need to deal with our mechanics that was mentioned with the 700,000 with the scope changes, we felt were really necessary. Some of it was for staffing, flexibility. Some of it, as you heard, I just want to remind you that it's for efficiencies with our mechanics. So in the long run, we could save money by doing it this way. And so I want everyone just to keep those ideas in mind, despite the fact that, we have had an increase. And, I hope you'll give some thought to why that has occurred, and we'll still, before this project and realize the importance of it. We've had great discussions over the course of the year with the Buildings and Grounds, and we all are in agreement to move forward. So thank you.
Supervisor Backlund.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to agree with what Laura said and kind of reiterate. While you see increases to some of the budgetary items, over the long run, it's going to save us money, especially going to the centralized plant. We're going to be much more efficient. Maintenance on that system is far less than currently what we had. And if we duplicated what we had, we would have higher maintenance costs. So my background is spend a little extra now, and then down the road, you're not paying those reoccurring charges. And the one addition with the kind of the flopping of the courtrooms, if you will, that allows potentially maybe one less person or a half a person. And as you know, over the course of a time, an FTE, that goes out infinitely because that goes out through the career and then they retire. So we're looking at things for the long haul for the county and not for the short term. Is this going to be the cheapest way to do it? Because we think in the long run, that's going to save the county and the taxpayers money. So that was our thought process on that. The mechanical's going to have to be replaced anyhow. We have to deal with them. And so therefore, that's why we are recommending going forward with this. And hopefully everyone will understand where we've been. We've had extra meetings to make sure we haven't missed anything. And again, it's been great working with the consultants we have and the project manager, and I think we're kind of going in the right direction. Thank you.
Supervisor Brogler.
My question is probably more for Ben, but with that $7 million we set aside for ARPA, and I know it can only be used for certain things in this project, I understand that, but is that actually going to be used against the 36 million, or is it a form of a contingency? So will actually the 36 million be more like 30 million?
So I would say when we initially had reserved those dollars, and what we're looking at primarily is HVAC, because that's the one that's very clear in the ARPA guidance you can use it towards, and that's a significant amount of this project, obviously. I'd say it wasn't necessarily a contingency, but a deduct from the bond proceeds, so 36 minus the 7. That math has changed a little bit now, potentially, so it's probably more of a 4 million contingency, we'll call it, up to that, to cover up to that 9% scenario almost. If that makes sense.
So what does that make the new quote-unquote bottom line?
So right now, the bottom line right now is still $36 million. If we go to the market today, including the 8% inflation and almost a $3 million contingency is in that number as well.
So without that $7 million, that number would be more like 40.
No.
So I'm not understanding.
The 7 million this is below the line. This is our expenditures. Then we got to think above the line, which is our revenue. So our revenue right now was the bond proceeds, up to $36 million plus 7 million ARPA. So the initial intent of that revenue stream was we didn't have to bond for all that money. The goal was using some of the ARPA was reduce the extra amount of money that was bonded for. So the above, bond plus ARPA, should equal those expenditures once we're completed that project. So we purposely tried to avoid throwing revenue on this, just because that message should be coming from finance committee and us.
So if a common citizen asks me how much is this going to cost, is it 36?
It's still $36 million.
Even with that ARPA money?
Correct.
What? No. It would be 20.
No.
I don't know if I understand.
So-
So the $7 million is not accounted for on this page. So that this wouldn't be $43 million. This isn't 43 minus 7, if that's what you're asking.
No, is it 36 minus 7?
So it would be, I guess if you attributed this entire ARPA to this job, theoretically you'd be bonding 29.
No, I don't want to know the bonding part. If some Joe Smith on the street comes up and said, how much money is this going to cost us?
36.3 million as in today's dollars.
So if we wouldn't have had that $7 million, that number would be that much larger.
No.
So this is not making sense. We've got $7 million here that's just floating around.
So the numbers shown are actual costs between soft cost, holding cost, and actual construction costs, contingency costs, design costs, engineering costs, all in project costs. That number estimated with actual numbers, i.e. the contract with design, plus Anthony team going out and actually getting quotes with today's dollars, is 36.3 million. That's what the project, as of right now, is being estimated to cost totally. That includes $2.7 million in contingency. When we build the budget, that $7 million is a revenue stream, not a cost. So that's not floating out there. The intent is then we can take that from that 36 million, which was the authorized amount up to bonding, to only issue debt of $29 million. That was the initial intention. Now, depending on how this flows, that might be maybe issue 33 million and then use some of that ARPA money to make up that delta. So right now, if someone on the street asks you what's the current estimated cost, it's $36.3 million. And these are inflationary contingencies.
Other questions?
I'm sorry, I'm still not getting this. So where'd the 7 million go in that 36 million?
It's not included in there right now.
So, okay, so let's say the year is 2045.
Yep.
What did it cost us to build this building?
As of today,
With that $7 million included?
Mixing apples and oranges.
it's 36 million, right? It's the 36 million is the actual cost. The 7 million is part of the bonding to determine how we pay for that project.
I'm not getting it. I'm sorry. That $7 million is of no value the way I see that.
The value.
I don't care about apples or oranges. Where's the 7 million then? I don't want to know its cost or its benefit. Bottom line, if we throw the $7 million into the bonding program somewhere in the next couple of sessions, what is it still 36 million?
It's still $36 million.
So where's that 7 million going?
7 million goes towards defraying the cost of how much is bonded for. So
All that money's going for interest.
no, it's not going for interest. It goes against the $36 million of bonding. So you reduce the amount actually you bond for in theory by $7 million. So you're only bonding for $29 million.
So so that's what it's costing us.
But the number is still 36 million.
I'm sorry. I guess I'm just.
It's still 36 million.
Financial mind, that $7 million is gone somewhere.
Uh.
I'm not a numbers person.
I get it. Well, I'm just trying to say the bottom line does not change with the 7 million. That 7 million impacts how we pay for it potentially.
Do you have a clarification? Is it something like you want to know how much the taxpayers are going to pay, or local taxpayer, or property taxpayer? Is that what?
Well, I'm just saying, somebody comes up to me in the street and says, how much is it going to cost over the life of this building? And that looks like that $7 million that we set aside. It seems like that $7 million should go instead of 36, even though I get it's the bonding portion, so we've not put that money out there yet. So when the second time we bond, instead of bonding for 15 million, we bond for 8 million. But doesn't that mean then that that number goes down? Am I the only one not getting this?
Actually, a concern. That's a construction project.
Mr. Chair.
One second.
Well, I mean, my bottom line is I said when we did all this that I would not agree to any increase. I will allow for inflation. I get that's out of our control completely, but I was really hoping that $7 million would really impact that number to some extent. But the way you're explaining to me, it impacts us borrowing in the future, which you're telling me, yeah.
Mr. Backlund wants to.
Maybe this will help, maybe it won't. You're gonna go out and buy a car and it's $40,000. Your grandma says, passed away or whatever, and there's money sitting, let's say, $10,000 that you've got because your grandma passed away. So there's $10,000. Does the car cost you $30,000? Does the car cost $30,000 or $40,000? You know what I'm saying? That's what Ben's saying.
So my
the car
question
still
is, what
costs.
are we paying for it then? Not what's it cost? Maybe I've used the wrong word.
Okay.
Mr. Nealon, you had your hand up?
Yep. The building is going to cost 36.3 million. And then that's going to get divided up between the cost to the county and the cost coming in from the funds, the 7 million. So the building costs 36.3. What it costs the county differs once you take away the 7 million. So we will just have less to bond using the 7 million, but the building still costs 36.3 million. So the county is essentially taking a loan for 36.3 million, or bonding it, minus the 7 million right now. Building still costs 36.3 million. The cost to the county is different, but the hard costs for the building are the same. I don't know if does that help?
Supervisor Smith.
My question is about the addition to the Main Street side. It seems like there used to be a entrance or exit right there. Is there going to be some kind of emergency exit, or are there doors on that room addition, like on the south side there? I saw windows, I didn't see a door there.
No, there is a door. We do have a required exit. There's a stairwell that will actually dump out onto that side. So we do have the required exits to meet code. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is going back to, you had talked a bit about the parking that is going to be dedicated to the judges. I think there were 7 spaces, looked like there was another 7 spaces on the other side. And then they're going to have a private entryway and corridor to get to their offices. Is that parking area going to be covered? Is it going to be secured anyway? How would you describe that?
So that's actually in partnership with our sheriff. That is an existing underground parking lot that's located off South Center Avenue where sheriff's vehicles currently park. So we're using existing resources with some modifications to the interior corridor, with some of the programs that we're looking at changing with the sheriff's department for vehicles, and that parking lot across the street that frees up space in there so that they can then now use that for the judges and the other components, so they have the underground secure parking and still leave some space open for the sheriff's department.
Thank you. I get that.
Other questions? Other questions?
So we are having a Buildings and Grounds Committee for further conversations on November 17th at 10 o'clock. So I encourage folks to listen in and provide additional comments back to that committee. I know several members have been sitting on those to get updated going forward. So this is a big project. Feel free to reach out to myself as well offline if you have additional questions or comments, or Ron and the rest of the team have been very good about following up with comments and questions as well. So I know we got about 5 minutes, Mr. Chair.
Any other?
Kelly's he raised his hand. Supervisor Kelly raised his hand.
Mr. Kelly? Mr. Kelly? Supervisor Kelly, you have a question?
He's not responding.
Supervisor Kelly, do you have a question?
Okay.
Okay. We will briefly adjourn and we'll start up our regular meeting in about 5 minutes. Start a little.